what God judges a nation by or a state by. Or he says, you know, I've made it really clear that here's what I want for public policy. And you're nowhere close to that. I can't bless you. It's what we also saw yesterday, that if you do what God's Word says, you get blessed, whether that's through not having abortions or following His health care laws or sexuality standards or whatever it is. Blessings come when you do it God's way. So it's the same for public policy. Now, it's significant that according to the Bible, a public policy will affect every single person in that jurisdiction, even those that disagree with that policy. I mean, real simply. So a public policy can impact every citizen, even those who disagree with it. Now, why is that the case? That doesn't seem fair. Why would God hold His blessings off of something, even if you got good people in it? And here's the way the founders understood it out of the Scriptures. You go back to the Constitutional Convention, you go back to when they were forming the Constitution, and at that point in time, there was some significant discussions over public policies. And one of the guys who took a very clear policy position was George Mason. Now, you need to understand George Mason, and he's called the father of the Bill of Rights, a very significant founding father. There are 55 guys who framed the Constitution of the United States. Only 39 signed the document. 16 did not. He is one of the guys who helped frame the document but refused to sign the document. Now, why didn't he sign the document? Well, he's a slaveholder. He owned slaves. Why didn't he sign the document? Because the Constitution did not abolish slavery. Wait a minute. You own slaves, why don't you just turn your slaves free? Because in the state of Virginia, it was illegal to free your slaves. He says slavery should end. And the Constitution has not ended slavery. I can't sign that. Why? He explained. And it was all about blessings. This is what he said. He says, nations cannot be rewarded or punished in the next world, so they must be in this. He said, by an inevitable chain of causes and effects, providence punishes national sins by national calamities. His thing is, there's no way God's going to bless slavery, which means we're not going to get His blessing. And if we don't end slavery, we won't get His blessing. And I'm not going to be part of it. So here's a slave owner who understood this. But see, look at the significance of what he said. He says, nations cannot be rewarded or punished in the next world, only in this. We understand that we all will be resurrected at some point in time to answer for what we've done. Not so with nations. You know, God's not going to resurrect the Soviet Union at the end of time and say, Soviet Union, why'd you do that? The Soviet Union is gone. It doesn't exist anymore. It's gone. It'll never be resurrected, and God won't resurrect it. Nations have to answer only right now. They have no other existence but right now. Only while a nation is alive does it get blessings and punishments. Now, for us, we get rewards and punishments now, but also after we pass on. We get eternal life or eternal judgment. I mean, for us, it doesn't stop right in this life. For atheists, they think it does, but for us, it doesn't. But it does for nations. Nations have no existence other than right now, so every policy that is enacted by a nation will either bring God's blessing or God's judgment. God will say, that's good, I can bless that, or that's not good, and I can't bless that. That's what they understood about national accountability. Now, there were preachers who talked about this as well. This preacher, Reverend Chandler Robbins, is the one who gave the address to the Massachusetts legislature in 1791. And as he's got the whole legislature in front of him, they're speaking to him, he reminds them of the same principle. He said, you guys, you're political leaders. This is a political entity, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and the policies you make as political leaders have direct consequence on every single one of us. Here's what he said. He said, the supreme governor of the world rewards or punishes nations and civil communities only in this life. It's only right now. What you guys do right now affects everything right now, not in the future. He said, political bodies are but the creatures of time. He says they have no existence as such, but in the present state. Consequently, they're incapable of punishments or rewards in a future state. There is no future for nations or communities or cities or states. We can conceive of no way in which the divine being shall therefore manifest the purity of His nature towards such societies, but by rewarding or punishing them here according to their public conduct. Now, biblical examples abound on this one. It's really easy. You take Elijah, talked yesterday about how Elijah was about to confront Ahab and Jezebel. Remember, he said, we have not had rain in this nation for 3.5 years because of your wicked policies. Well, you remember God also hauled Elijah off, and in that cave he said, Elijah, I got thousands of guys who have never bowed their knee to Baal, including Elijah. But you know what? They all went through a 3.5-year drought. Every one of them. Even Elijah did. Ravens had to bring him food on a special basis because the whole nation's in drought. So even the righteous guys go through national droughts because national leaders make bad policies that affect the whole nation. You see that across the story of Israel. Jeremiah gets hauled off. He goes to Egypt and, he's righteous, but the nation gets hauled off because of their wickedness. Even the righteous guys in the nation got hauled off because of their wickedness. The Bible is full of how the nations affect everybody, even those that disagree with the policies, which is why in America, we've got the chance to be involved. If we're not involved and we don't like the policies that are going on, we get judged for that as well. We'll suffer the consequences, even if we disagree with those policies. So this is what we understood about righteousness. Righteousness exalts a nation, sends a reproach to any people. And now, how do you get righteous policies in a nation then? Really, really easy. Proverbs 29:2 tells us, it says that when the righteous rule, the people rejoice. When the wicked rule, the people groan. You get righteous people in office, you get righteous policies. Wicked people will not give you righteous policies, and righteous people won't give you wicked policies. The best way to get righteousness to exalt a nation or a state or a county or a city is to make sure you have righteous rulers. And that's what the Bible says. When the righteous rule, people rejoice. It's great because we get blessed. When the wicked rule, the people groan. It does not take a hearing aid to hear all the groaning going on across America right now. If we've got groaning going on across America, what is the issue? We don't have righteous rulers. How come we don't? In America, whether the righteous or the wicked rule is always our choice. It is only our choice. Nobody else chooses the righteous or wicked but us. We're the stewards of the country. So if groaning's going on, it's because wicked rule, which is because we didn't do anything to keep them out, or not enough of us did something. So I'll get to that in a minute. We'll get into that in a different thing. So understanding that you want righteous rulers and that you want righteous policies, the Founding Fathers took great steps to do that, particularly when they formed their new governments. As they were creating their brand new governments, and you got to remember that with the new governments that they were creating, let's see here if I can get this moving. It's trying to freeze up on me. And the new governments that they were creating, you remember that in 1776 with the American Revolution, when they signed the Declaration of Independence, we mentioned yesterday that what they did is they wiped out 13 British governments. So what they have to do is they have to go to their own states and start creating their own first original state governments, which is why you start Maryland Constitution begins in 1776. You have Virginia, 1776, North Carolina, 1776, New Jersey, 1776, Pennsylvania. These guys went home and started doing that. And so these guys who gave us our documents, the Founding Fathers who signed the documents, they start going back, for example, from New Jersey. You had founders like John Witherspoon who head back to New Jersey. He helped write the original 1776 Constitution of New Jersey. Over in Maryland, it was Charles Carroll, one of the signers, the guy who signed the Declaration, who heads home to start writing their Constitution. So you find this going across the founders. We have now eliminated British civil government, but God says we can't be without civil government, so let's go create them. And since we get to create them, let's make sure we do this right. So look how they did it. Look, for example, at the state of Delaware. See Delaware up there? Delaware, there were a number of founding fathers from Delaware who went back to Delaware to write their Constitution. You have folks like Thomas McKean, you have folks like George Reed, John Dickinson, all these guys, they went back to create the very first 1776 Delaware Constitution. Look what the Delaware Constitution of 1776 says. Just read it to you. This is their requirement. This is what the founding fathers put in there. Every person shall be chosen a member of either legislature, either House or Senate, shall say, I do profess faith in God the Father and in the Lord Jesus Christ, His only Son, and in the Holy Ghost, one God and blessed forevermore. And I do acknowledge the Holy Scriptures, the Old and New Testament, to be given by divine inspiration. Now, that's the requirement to hold public office in Delaware. Now, we would love to have this as a requirement for Bible school. It'd be great if you believe that to go to Bible school. That's what you used to have to believe to go into political office in America. Now, why would they put that requirement in there? Do you think you'll get righteous policies out of people who believe that? Sure you will. There's a much higher chance you're going to get public policies that God can bless if you got people like that in office. So that's Delaware. Let's go to some other states. In addition to Delaware, let's jump up to, let's go to Massachusetts. Massachusetts, a number of the signers of the Declaration went home to write the Constitution of Massachusetts. You have folks like Robert Treat Paine. You also have Sam Adams. You have on the other side, you have John Hancock and John Adams. These guys all go home to write the original Massachusetts Constitution. It's a 1780 Constitution. That's the one that they still have in Massachusetts today. It's the only Constitution they've ever had. By the way, the Massachusetts Constitution is the only Constitution in the world that's older than the U.S. Constitution that's been in continuous use. So Massachusetts Constitution written by these guys in 1780. Look what it says in the Massachusetts Constitution, and this is what it contains even today. Any person chosen governor or lieutenant governor, councilor, senator, or representative must say, I do declare that I believe the Christian religion have firm persuasion of its truth. Do you know that's still in the Massachusetts Constitution to this day? I don't think they believe it. I don't think they do it. And as a matter of fact, when they gave us homosexual marriage, it was very clear they hadn't read their Constitution, because their Constitution does exactly otherwise. The Constitution has a lot of biblical positions. It actually talks about Christians and evangelical Christianity and protecting worship and how important that is in public life. And it's all over the Massachusetts Constitution, but we don't want to do that stuff today. Well, look at the kind of policies we get as a result. Do you think it's possible God can bless homosexual marriage when He said that marriage is a lifelong union of man and woman? Absolutely not. That's the problem we've got. See, everybody in Massachusetts lacks the blessing that God would give if they honored marriage the way He designed it. It's a real simple thing. Even the people in Massachusetts who are fighting the right way, trying to do the right thing, you go back, the accountability of nations, cities, states, etc., and God will take care of you. I mean, if God has to send ravens to have food for Elijah, He will, but that doesn't change the fact that Elijah lived through a 3.5-year drought because of the wickedness of the national leaders. So that's what you have in Massachusetts. Let's continue. Go to other states. Jump up here to Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, you have found it. Now, this is a fun one because Ben Franklin leads and goes home to write the 1776 Constitution of Pennsylvania. Everybody thinks Franklin is one of our least religious founding fathers, which he is. He's least religious, but I would argue Franklin is more religious than most Christians today. Look what he puts in the Constitution 1776 for Pennsylvania. Oops, back up. I skipped by it there. 1776 Constitution of Pennsylvania. This is what Ben Franklin puts in there. This is what it says. Each member of the legislature shall say, I do believe in one God, the creator and governor of the universe, the rewarder of the good and the punisher of the wicked, and I acknowledge the scriptures of the Old and New Testament to be given by divine inspiration. If you believe that God will reward the right and punish the wrong, and you believe that as a legislator, you're very cognizant of the policies you enact. Because if I believe that God will judge or reward, I want to make sure I get the rewards, not the judgment. You can't even hold office in Pennsylvania unless you believe that. So what kind of policies do we expect to get out of Pennsylvania? You jump over to a state like North Carolina. Look at North Carolina, what they said. North Carolina, real simple. No person who shall deny the being of God or the truth of the Christian religion or the divine authority, either of the Old or New Testaments, shall be capable of holding any office or place of trust or profit in the civil department within the state. That's what you find in their constitutions that they did back there once we separated from Great Britain. So they were very cognizant of this, and it all goes to the same principle, Proverbs 29:2, that righteousness exalts a nation. That when the righteous rule, the people rejoice, and when the wicked rule, the people groan. They really worked hard to make sure the righteous would rule. So that's an aspect. Now, in addition to them creating their state governments, there were two different philosophies of how you have good government. Everybody wants good government. One philosophy was set forth by John Locke back in 1690. Talked about John Locke, how that he's the guy who did the two treatises of government that quotes the Bible 1,500 times. But he also wrote the original Constitution of Carolina for 1690. Back when Carolina was one colony rather than two. It wasn't North and South, it was just the colony of Carolina. Back in that 1660 time frame, he writes the original Constitution, and he loads it up with all these really good laws. And his point was, if I stack the Constitution up with all these great laws, then no matter who gets in office, they will be bound by the good laws. So he wrote it right in the Constitution, all these great laws right in the Constitution. And the philosophy was from John Locke that if you can have the right kind of laws, you'll get the right kind of policy. Now, you have a different approach that was given by William Penn. William Penn did Pennsylvania. He did the frame of government for Pennsylvania in 1681-82. He also did the frame of government for Delaware and the frame of government for Jersey, West Jersey, East Jersey. So here's a guy who wrote a lot of governments, and his philosophy was quite different. He said it's not about having good laws. It's about having good leaders. And this is the way that William Penn explained it. And remember, he's the guy who was in jail in England because he didn't attend the right church. The state said, you have to go to the Anglican church. He says, I want the Quaker church. He attended the Quaker church. He ends up being thrown in prison and put on trial because he goes to the wrong church. Again, that's that state-established religion where they're going to control doctrine and theology. That's the wrong way of doing it. So William Penn comes to America, sits at the frame of government here, and he tells us how he thinks. He says, this is how government should be based. And it's really interesting the way he goes through it. He says, governments, like clocks, go from the motion that men give them. In other words, you know how clocks back then, you had to put the key in and wind it up. the clock was dependent on the humans. If the humans didn't put the effort into it, the clock wasn't going to work. He said it's the same thing with governments. You don't have good governments just because you have good governments. It depends on the effort that the people put into it, because governments, like clocks, go from the motion that men give them. He continued, he says, and as governments are made and moved by men, by them are they ruined too. You can have great governments, but if you have the wrong people winding it up, they will break the mainspring on that, and they'll ruin government. So people can ruin clocks or they can preserve clocks, the same with government. He continued, he said, wherefore, governments rather depend upon men than men upon governments. It's more important the kind of men you have in office than the kind of government you have. He says, let men be good and the government cannot be bad. He said, but if men be bad, the government will never be so good. They'll endeavor to warp and spoil it to their turn. If you get bad people in office, even if you have great laws, they will find a way to turn everything toward them. They'll find a way to be corrupt. They'll find a way to skim what they want. If you got bad people in office, it doesn't matter how good your laws are against corruption or anything else. He continues, he says, I know some say, let us have good laws, and it doesn't matter for the men that execute. That's what John Locke said. If you have good laws, it doesn't matter who you put in office, they will follow the good laws. He said, I know some have said that. He said, but let them consider that though good laws do well, it's not bad to have good laws. He said, good men do better. It's a whole lot more important to have good leaders than it is good laws. He said, for good laws may lack good men to uphold them, but good men will never lack good laws, and they'll never allow bad ones. That's real simple. You put the right kind of people in office, they're not going to pass bad laws, and they will uphold good laws. You put bad people in office, they will not uphold good laws, and they will pass bad laws. So it goes back to the type of people you have in office, which is, again, is Proverbs 29:2. Proverbs 29:2 says, when the righteous rule, the people rejoice. When the wicked rule, the people... You see how they take that verse and work it out in practical life? They're taking this verse and thinking through it and saying, how do we ensure that this happens when we create our constitutions? How do we ensure this happens when we have our elections? How do we ensure this happens when we make our laws? And they're thinking through all the way through. Now, what happens with this is you have to understand that if you get the right or the wrong people in office, what you have elected to office is a worldview. And that worldview will determine the policies that are there. So when you look at political office, you have to look at political parties and worldview. People, Christians particularly, don't like political parties, and people all the time criticize. I hate both parties. I think both of them stink. Don't get caught on both parties, because there's more than that. There's 17 third parties out there. There's 2 major political parties. So you got about 19 political parties. You got anything you want to choose from if you don't like the 2 parties. But that fails to understand why parties even exist. I want to take you back to a government textbook that we used in America for a number of decades. This is called Young's Book on Government. It was from Young American's Book on Government. It's from 1843. And it talks about political parties. And you have to understand back then there was 5 or 6 different political parties. You had the Free Soilers and the Emancipationists, and you had the Unionists, and you had the Democrats, and you had the Whigs, and you had all these parties. And this is what we understood about political parties. Look what it says here. You see the top part? It says, political parties have existed in all free governments. They spring from the different views which different persons take of great questions affecting the public interest. In other words, people coalesce around, I like that view, I don't like that view. I like that policy, I don't like that policy. So people who agree with your policy will come together to enact that policy. People who like this policy, and that's how parties get started. They come together to enact common beliefs. So it continues, it said, persons entertaining the same views will associate together, and they'll act together to carry the measures they approve and to defeat those they condemn. Other persons entertaining opposite views will also associate together to counteract the operations of the first party thus formed. So we have a group over here that says we want to protect marriage as a man and a woman, and we have a group over here that says we want marriage to be anything we define it to be. These people will all organize together over here and say we're going to do everything we can to make sure we have marriage as a man and woman. We're going to put it on the ballot. We're going to have marriage initiatives. We're going to go to the courts. We're going to do everything we can. And these guys over here say we're going to do everything we can to have marriage any definition we want. We're going to defeat their marriage initiatives. We're going to go into court and fight them. We're going to, and they're both political parties. You have a political party that supports traditional marriage. You have a political party that opposes it. It's real simple. A political party is a group of people that get together to carry forward their beliefs and their agenda. That's all a political party is. So if you get rid of the Republicans and Democrats, you don't get rid of political parties. You'll have other people who have some of those views, and they'll create their thing, and they'll take some of this and some of that, and then this will be their platform. And by the way, it's always significant to read party platforms, because then you find out the agenda that they want to move forward. The problem we have today, and I often do this, I speak to thousands of ministers every year, and I'll get 500 ministers in a group and say, I want you guys to name for me every measure that you know Congress acted on. Everything you've heard about in the last 2 years, that's a session of Congress, 2 years, tell me what they've acted on. And generally, I'll get 6 or 7 things that they have heard about that Congress acted on. Well, the difficulty with that is Congress has between 10 and 13,000 issues every single session of Congress. We only hear what the media talks about, which is what interests the media, which is not very much. And what interests the media doesn't interest us because they're really secular guys. So what they want to talk about is stuff we don't care about. So we get a perception that this is all the parties care about. And no. There's between 10 and 13,000 bills introduced every session of Congress. You want to see what they believe, you don't look at what you hear in the news. You go online and you read the party platform for the Libertarian Party or for the Democrat Party or for the Constitution Party or for any other party, Republican Party. In my case, just full frankness up front, I helped write the Republican platform in the last session. It's about 150 pages long, and there's hundreds of policies we put in there. Most folks can't name more than 2 or 3 things Republicans believe. You want to see what we want accomplished, go read our platform. And by the way, we got a lot of that accomplished. We didn't get everything we wanted accomplished, but I will point out we had 190 votes on pro-life measures. Did you hear 190 votes covered by the media that we voted on pro-life measures? See, life was a big issue that we covered. We want to protect unborn life from point of conception forward. 190 votes on that. Yeah, nobody heard about that in the news. So don't ever get caught up with what the media says are the issues. Go read the platforms. That's why each party creates a platform. Read the Democrat platform. Read all the platforms, because that's what political parties are. They advance, they exist to enact policy. What are the policies they want? You may not like what we wrote in the platform for Republicans. It's great. You know, get a party together, write your own platform, enact your own policy. That's all parties are. They're groups that get together to enact policy. Now, continue. Look at this. Here's the next part down here. The dangers of political parties, it tells us next. Thus, one party always begats another party. They're for marriage, they're against it. They're for life, unborn life, they're against it. One party will always have those on the opposite view. So one party always begets another, and as ambitious individuals are apt to put themselves at the head of these several parties and excite them against each other, because these guys make a lot of money by telling their people how wicked these guys are. And these guys raise money by saying, oh, we got to stop those wackos over there because they'll take. And so what you do is you get them excited against each other, and then you raise money and you get coverage. And so that's the danger. They excite them against each other, and there's usually a good deal of bitterness between them. It has often happened that persons have become so devoted to party as to forget their country, and in some instances, patriotism has been swallowed up in party spirit. What happened, and by the way, this is 1843. Does it sound like it might work today? Does that sound like a description that might be relevant? See, it's because the principles don't change. The names of the parties have changed across time, but the principles don't change. You'll always have people that support or oppose something. George Washington, in his farewell address, considered the most significant political speech ever given by a U.S. president. In his farewell address, he went through and told us exactly the things that were our dangers. He gave about a dozen warnings to the nations, and one of the warnings he gave was against the love of political parties. Now, it's not hating political parties, but when you love a political party more than you love principles, then you're in trouble. And that's where we've gotten today, but that's not new too, because that's always existed in time. There were those, see, when you love your party more than you love principles, the end justifies the means. You'll do whatever it takes to keep your party in power, to keep your viewpoints there, to keep your guys elected. If you love principles more than you love party, which that's, I hope, is where I am, that's why I'll go out and endorse Democrats from time to time. Because if they'll support the principles I stand for, I don't care what party they're in, I want that principle moving forward. And so I actually gave money last year to pro-life Democrats because I'm a big pro-life guy. So anybody that wants to move the pro-life ball down the court, I'll go to bat for them. So what you want is you don't want to love your party more than you love your principles. That's the problem. And that's the problem. And I'll tell you, there's people in parties today, they're part of that party, but they love principles more than parties. And I can tell you the inner workings of how often pro-life, conservative, pro-marriage, pro-biblical Republicans are beating on their leadership saying, you guys are so hurting us, so out of step. All you hear is what the media gives you. You don't see what goes on. As I mentioned yesterday, there's probably 120 members of Congress I consider to be very close friends. Got them cell phone, and I can call them, and we talk to each other on a regular basis. See, there's a lot more that goes on than the public perception that we get. So George Washington, here's what he said. Very simple. He said, let me warn you in the most solemn manner against the baneful effects of the spirit of party. An elected government is truly their worst enemy. Whoa. The worst enemy in an elected government is the spirit. And it's not party. He said the spirit of party. Let me warn you against the spirit of party. You pick up the spirit of party where you love that party more than anything else. He said that's the worst enemy of elected governments. He continued, he says, the alternate domination of one faction or one party over another, sharpened by the spirit of revenge, natural to party dissension, is itself a frightful destiny. Well, when you guys had the Senate, here's what you did to us, so now we're going to do it to you. It's not about good policy, it's about revenge, getting back and forth, and so that's not a good thing. And he continues. He says, the common and continual mischiefs of the spirit of party are sufficient to make it the interest and duty of a wise people to discourage and restrain it. So that was the warning we had. Parties are fine, but don't love parties more than you love your country or more than you love your principles. And that's what Christians need to get a hold of. There's nothing wrong with parties. You see, all a party is a bus, and it's going to go to some destination. People get on that bus to go to that destination, but the big thing is not the bus or what the bus looks like, it's who drives the bus. What destination is that bus going to? So the parties are just a bus. It's whoever gets in control and decides what policies they're going after, where they're going. That's the most important thing, is where's this bus going, not what it looks like. Is it a 10-year-old bus, a 5-year-old bus? Is it the latest, newest bus? No, where is this? I want to know the destination you're taking me to. And that's why Christians have to look at parties very closely and say, what destination? If you want to know the destination, read the platform again. It's very significant. So back to this. This is what the Founding Fathers believed about parties. And so from that standpoint, the fact that parties exist to promote a specific worldview, their view of whatever they think a good America looks like or a good economy looks like, they're going to promote their worldview. But we also have officials that are in office that don't belong to any party. Does that mean they don't have a worldview? Sure they do. Every person in office has a worldview, including people that we call nonpartisan people. Nonpartisan means absolutely nothing. What you want to know is not what party they belong to, what worldview do you hold? And see, a great example of that is federal judges. Federal judges are all nonpartisan. You don't know whether a federal judge is Democrat or Republican or Libertarian or Constitution Party or Green Party or any other. You don't know. They're all nonpartisan. They don't have a party affiliation. Does that mean that they don't have a worldview? Sure, they've got a worldview. This is a great example. Federal Judge Samuel Kent. We're involved in this case that went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. It came out of the little town of Santa Fe, Texas. Santa Fe, Texas, a little town down toward Galveston area, little town down there on the coast. And as long as they had had that school in Santa Fe, Texas, they had had prayer at athletic events and they had prayer at graduations. Well, that gets challenged. You can't pray with kids in public. What are you thinking? And so the lawsuit goes forth, and it's called Jane Doe versus Santa Fe Independent School District, and it's in front of Judge Samuel Kent. And so the question is, this is what the school has always done. This is what the people want. There's a couple of individuals who don't want this in the community, but everybody else wants it. And what are we going to do with this? And so Judge Kent renders his ruling. He says, I've looked at this, and I've decided you can have a prayer at graduation. I'm going to let you have a prayer at graduation, but it's got to be the right kind of prayer. Well, I'll just show you what he says. This is what he says. He says, this court will allow that prayer if it's a typical non-denominational prayer. It can refer to God or the Almighty or that sort of thing, but the prayer must not refer to a specific deity by name, whether it be Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, the great god Shiva, or anyone else. In other words, you can pray, but you just can't say who you're praying to. What happened to my right of free speech, by the way? Is religious speech less than free speech? And free speech, now if I want to criticize Jesus, I can do that. If I want to criticize, he would have upheld that. But for me to be respectful toward them, I can't do that. And so now the court is telling me what words I will and will not use in my prayer. Hey, that's back to period 2 Christianity, when the government is telling the church what they can and can't do with their beliefs and their religious behavior and how they can express it. This is exactly why we created the First Amendment of the Constitution, so the government could not dictate what our religious activities would be. But he continues. He said, and make no mistake, this court is going to have United States Marshal in attendance at graduation. If any student offends this court, that student will be summarily arrested and will face 6 months incarceration in the Galveston County Jail for contempt of court. Anyone who thinks I'm kidding about this order better think again. You guys can have prayer, but I'm going to have a marshal there and listen to that prayer. And if you say the wrong word, if I hear a kid say Jesus, you're going to jail for 6 months if you say the wrong word. Now, you want to tell me he doesn't have a worldview? Sure, he's got a worldview. Now, he's not a Republican or a Democrat that we can tell, He's got a worldview. See, that's why party labels mean absolutely nothing. What you want to find out is what's the worldview of the individual, where are they going to take us? When they start driving the bus, where's the bus going to go? Well, where are we headed on this? And by the way, look at the rest of what he said here. He says, anybody who violates these orders, no kidding, is going to wish that he or she had died as a child when this court gets through with it. By the way, if you want to see how often this stuff goes on in the United States, go to a website called religiousHostility.org. More than 1,200 incidents just in recent years of decisions like that. You think this is strange, out of the ordinary? No, it's not. Now, have you heard this decision discussed on the media? Don't think so. That's not of importance to them because they liked it. Hey, that's right. You guys shouldn't be using the word Jesus when you pray. So we go based on what we hear others talk about, and this is not important to them, therefore we don't hear it, so we think it's not happening. No. ReligiousHostility.org, 1,200 instances just like this of the hostility that exists toward Christianity. Does that tell you something about the views of your elected officials? Does that tell you something about the views of your judges? Sure it does. They're God hostile. We got to know that if we're going to replace them with the right kind of people. So, continue on this. This goes back to the same thing we've been looking at before. Judge Kent says, says, when the righteous rule, the people rejoice. When the wicked rule, the people groan. It's that way with judges as well. They don't have a political, you know what? It's that way with mayors who are usually nonpartisan. It's that way with school board presidents. It's that way with school board members. It's that way with those who sit on a public utility district. It's that way with those who are on a junior college board that you elect. We elect people on all these boards, and they all have a worldview. And if the righteous do not rule, then we're going to have trouble on the junior college board, on the public utilities board. We're going to have trouble on the mayor, the city council. We're going to have trouble in the school board. It's all there. Now, Christians have taken it on themselves. As I mentioned yesterday, we're not very good at participating in voting anymore. But we used to believe otherwise. I told you yesterday about Benjamin Rush, signer of the Declaration, considered one of the three most notable of the Founding Fathers, what John Adams called him. He is known as the father of public schools under the Constitution because not only he signed the Declaration in 1776, he ratified the Constitution in 1788, and then in 1789 the federal government goes into operation, and in 1790 he writes this piece right here, the mode of operation, on the mode of education proper in a republic. And he said, now that we have become 13 states, the United States, what do we need to teach in our schools if we're going to stay a nation? What do we have to teach in our schools? And so we had been 13 colonies or 13 nations. I mean, don't think of them as 13 states because they weren't. It's more like France and Sweden and Austria and Spain. There were 13 nations. They even had wars between the colonies back then. I mean, they were not like we're all United States. So now that we've come to the United States and we've got these 13 diverse groups, what's it going to take for us to remain a nation? And that's where he went through and gave a dozen reasons that we would never take the Bible out of schools. He said, if we ever take the Bible out of public schools, we won't be a nation. We'll spend all of our time and money fighting crime when we could have prevented crime in the classroom by teaching the Bible, the thing that will keep us as nations to teach the Bible. And he also talked about what it is that public schools need to teach in addition to the Bible. And this is what he said. He said the first thing that public schools should do is that they should teach young people to love and serve God. He said that's the first purpose of public schools. He said, next, public schools should teach young people to love and serve their country. And then he said, next, public schools should teach young people to love and serve their parents, their family. Now, notice the sequence here. God, country, family. I think he got that wrong. I think if I asked everybody today, they would say the right sequence is God, family, and country. That's what we hear. But he said, God, country, and family. Why did he do that? Because he pointed out that if you ever lose control of your country, it will become the great enemy to the family. You want to protect your family? Keep control of your country. You lose control of your country, it'll start passing policies that harm your family, that take your family in the wrong direction. If you love your family, take care of your country. Wow, sounds like a prophet to me. Exactly what's happening. Look at all the policies we have today that make it so difficult for us to keep our kids loving God. And they're public policies that if we had different people in office, we wouldn't be dealing with. If we had different judges in office, and by the way, judges in office come from the people that we elect to office. We elect presidents, we elect U.S. senators, that's where your federal judges come from. We elect judges at the state level, or we elect a governor and state senate who appoint those judges. All judges come back to the people we choose. So there's no even unelected judges are there because of who we chose. So if you lose control of your country, you'll lose control of your family. Sam Adams said the same thing. Sam Adams, the father of the American Revolution, and he was just real clear back in that era. He said, every citizen will see, and I hope they'll be deeply impressed with the sense of it, how exceedingly important it is to himself and how intimately the welfare of his family, of his children, is connected with it, that those who have a share in making as well as in judging and executing the law should be men of singular wisdom and integrity. He said, I hope you understand, I hope you see the connection between what goes on with your children and the kind of people you put in office. See, if you love your children, you'll be involved in the civil arena because that's the best way of protecting your kids. So that's what we used to teach back in those days. Now, moving from that, kind of bring this to a wrap. I want to take you to the city of San Antonio as we get into the home stretch here. The city of San Antonio passed an NDO. You may not know what that is. You'll hear a lot about them. I think 205 cities have them now. NDO is a non-discrimination ordinance. And the NDOs that are passing right now are including gender perception and sexual orientation. And they're done specifically to protect homosexuals and transgenders in the place. And it doesn't give them equality, it gives them preeminence. I'll give you an example of what happened with San Antonio. San Antonio passed their NDO. Now, it's interesting. There's a Christian guy in San Antonio that's pretty eccentric. He's strange to a lot of Christians. Part of the reason he's nuts is that he attends every city council meeting and sits in and sees what the city council is doing. What Christian in their right mind would do that today? Well, the problem is we don't. He did. And as he did, he saw what they did with the non-discrimination ordinance, and he saw the provisions they attached to it. And then he went out and started telling Christians, they said, nah, they wouldn't do that. And he started telling churches, no, we don't get involved in politics. We're not going to worry about that. But he got some people to listen. And some people investigated, found out what they had done, started publicizing it. As more and more voices made it clear that this is what had happened, the churches said, would they really do that? And let me show you what was part of this provision. Part of this provision was real simple. They said, if you publicly disagree with homosexuality or homosexual marriage, if you take a position out loud in public, and we're live streaming this so people will be seeing this and they will know that I have taken a public position against homosexuality yesterday and for traditional marriage today. And if you're ever a pastor and you've ever preached a sermon that's done that, and by the way, you saw that that's why Louis Giglio was not allowed to pray the inauguration prayer for President Obama in 2012, as they found a sermon he had done 20 years earlier where he said marriage should be between a man and a woman. And they said, oh, you can't pray a prayer for the president, then you're out of this thing. So what happens is anybody at any point in time, even before all this homosexual agenda was coming together, if you at any point in time have criticized homosexuality or homosexual marriage, here's what the NDO in San Antonio said. You will be dismissed from office summarily. So if we find you're holding an office in San Antonio, and we find out that 18 years ago, as Facebook was just coming up, that you wrote something on Facebook about marriage as a man and a woman, you're immediately dismissed. And you can't dismiss them from office. They got elected by the people. No, in San Antonio, it's called malfeasance of office, and you can throw them out for malfeasance. So if you have ever stood up for marriage or criticized homosexuality, homosexual marriage, you're dismissed. And by the way, it's a Class C misdemeanor. It's a crime. You can't make my free speech a crime. I've got constitutional protections for my free speech. It doesn't stop there. It's also a $500 a day fine. Not only is it a crime, you will pay $500 a day for every time you have said something like that. So if I refuse to take it down off my website and I'll leave it up for a week, that sounds like about $3,500. Continue now. This is, the city doing business with city officials, public officials, etc. So if I'm a public official and I put up something that tells my position on marriage, that's a $500 a day fine. And by the way, that also goes to my conscience. I make wedding cakes. A homosexual couple comes to me and says, we want a wedding cake. I say, I can't make that. I start a fine right there, $500 a day for each day I will not make a homosexual's wedding cake. So I am a photographer, and I say, I can't photograph your wedding. My faith, I'm going to answer to God someday. I can't do that. So I pay a $500 day fine for each day I won't photograph that wedding. So $500 a day fine. Let's not stop there. You're also prohibited from running for office. So, I don't know, John Hagee, he can never run for office in San Antonio because he's talked about homosexuality. You can't keep him from running for office. He's got a constitutional right to put his name on the ballot and run for office. Yeah, San Antonio, you can keep him from running for office. You take the last part, you're prohibited from doing business with the city. I have a paving business. I build parking lots. Well, I once said that I thought marriage should be between a man and a woman. I can't even submit a bid to the city to compete in business for the city. I can't. Now remember, we're talking over 200 cities now who have done this kind of stuff, non-discrimination ordinances. Were you aware of that? No. We haven't heard this kind of stuff, and you weren't aware of all the leverage that's out there just waiting to fall on you when you do something wrong. How come? Well, I'll show you how come this happens in cities like San Antonio. But you know, you look at all this, that is pure stupidity. They can't do that. My rights are constitutional. I've got a constitutional right to be on the ballot. I've got the constitutional right to say what I believe. I've got the constitutional right to do business with. I've got all these constitutional rights, right? Wrong. My rights may be constitutionally given, but you have to understand that my rights are politically protected. It really doesn't matter what the Constitution says if I can't get protection for what the Constitution says. See, the Constitution may be clear on that. Here's the thing. Jesus told us in Matthew 28, 18 through 20, that we're to preach the gospel to every creature, teaching them everything he taught them, right? You got the Great Commission? Therefore, do we have a biblically given right to preach the gospel to all creatures? Yes. Absolutely. Why don't you go to Saudi Arabia and climb up on a street corner and try to exercise your biblically given right? Jesus Christ gave you the right to do it. Go to Saudi Arabia, see how it works out for you. Your right may be biblically given, but it has to be politically protected for you to enjoy the benefits of that right. If you don't see, and in America, we're getting to the point now where we no longer politically protect the right to proclaim Jesus Christ. As I mentioned yesterday, the kid got disciplined for saying, "God bless America," when he closed his announcements. What is that all about? That's not political protection for a constitutional right and a biblical right. We're to acknowledge God in everything we do. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. That kid did that, didn't have political protection in America. Constitutionally, he can do that, free speech, free exercise of religion. He didn't have political protection. Where do you get political protection? From the people you elect to office. It's how they interpret what they will use the power of government for. So your rights are constitutionally given, but they got to be politically protected. Let me go back to the Constitution again for a moment. The Constitution, those 55 guys that were there, one of them was a guy named John Francis Mercer. John Francis Mercer, one of the 55 guys who framed the Constitution of the United States. And as they were framing it, he made a comment to the others. He said, "You guys do realize that the Constitution we're framing is fairly useless? How can you, that's heresy to say something like that. Here's what he explained. He says, "It is a great mistake to suppose that the paper we're to propose will govern the United States. If you guys think what we're writing here in the Constitution is going to govern America," he said, "you're nuts." He said, "It won't." He said, "It's the men that the Constitution will bring into the government and the interest they have in maintaining it that will govern them." He said, "The paper will only mark out the mode and the form, but men are the substance and men must do the business." See, we got a great Constitution, but if you don't put people in office who respect that Constitution, it's absolutely worthless in their hands. They'll find ways to do things that violate it totally. And that's why he said, hey, the Constitution marks out the mode and the form. It'll show us how to elect people. But if we don't put the right people in office, the Constitution is absolutely worthless. Now, how did they get that? Because we're back to Proverbs 29:2. When the righteous rule, the people rejoice. When the wicked rule, the people groan. It all goes back to putting the right kind of people in office. So you see so many quotes where they understood the reality of this. So that's why our rights may be constitutionally given, but they've got to be politically protected. How do you protect it? Voting. It's real simple. Talked about that. Let me give you some stats on voting, particularly where we are as Christians. When you look at who can vote in the United States, 100% of those who are age 18 over can vote. Constitution says if you're 18 over, you can vote. 100% of people can vote. All you have to do is go register to vote to make sure, so we can make sure you didn't vote 2 times or 3 times or 4 times. 1 vote, 1 person is the rule. So if you're 18 over, you can vote once in every election. All we need you to do is register so we can make sure you didn't vote just that once. That's all. So when you look at those who are registered to vote, it's only 67.1% of American adults registered to vote. So already we've got 1/3 of the nation that says, I don't want any hand at all in choosing good or bad for office. I don't want any hand at all in what goes on in the direction of this nation. I just want to live over here in my little cocoon and little shell and hope everybody leaves me alone. I don't want a single bit of influence in what goes on. All it takes is a simple registration. So now we've taken 1/3 of American adults off the board. Now, let's go to elections like presidential elections. That's when you get the biggest turnout. This is when people go out to vote because last year we spent, year before last, we spent $1 billion of advertising. So everybody knew the presidential election, Romney and Obama. And that's when they go out to vote because they're aware of it, very cognizant. We don't hear much about city council elections or school board elections, but we heard about presidents. So that's when you get a high voter turnout. What you get is a voter turnout. Since 1980, we averaged 54% of registered voters turn out. Now, half of the registered. So we're talking 54% of 67.1%. Which means, in totality, only 36% of Americans actually vote in a presidential election. So when we choose a president since 1980, only 1 out of 3 Americans have had any hand in choosing the president. But some of those people voted against him. It only takes half of them to choose the winner. So all you need is the majority, which is 18%. So since 1980, only 1 out of 6 Americans has chosen the president of the United States. Is that already time? My gosh. Okay, we'll do that. And it's 1 out of 8 that chooses our governors and lieutenant governors. And guys, it's only 4% of the population that chooses our mayors. The reason we get non-discrimination ordinances is only 4% of adults go vote in city council elections. So we got to get back to being involved in the political arena. That starts with simple things like voting. See you guys in 10 minutes.